Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Ryan Day, the Ohio State Buckeyes, find their offensive line coach heading into 2025 and former Virginia Tech offensive coordinator and tight ends coach Tyler Bowen. This is not one of those coaching hires that's going to be taken over the internet. It's not going to be all over Twitter. It's kind of an under the radar hire that's not all that flashy, but it became very clear what Ryan Day was looking for in the next offensive line coach at Ohio State. And that is a guy that can recruit and get the offensive line recruiting at Ohio State largely back to where it belongs. This has been a trend that we've talked about a lot for Ohio State the last couple of years. It's one of the premier programs on the recruiting trail, as we all know. It always felt like the offensive line recruiting kind of lagged behind. It's really hard to sustain a powerful program when your offensive line is just not up to snuff on the recruiting trail. That's one of those positions in college football that it's very hard to address in the transfer portal. If you want to have a good offensive line, you got to recruit the guys out of the high school ranks. And, as good as Justin Fry did with that Ohio State offensive line in the college football playoffs, the recruiting never really clicked for his time in Columbus. You bring in Tyler Bowen with a clear emphasis on, hey, we got to start bringing in elite caliber dudes on the offensive line. I think Tyler Bowen can bring that to Ohio State. We're going to look at some of the names that he was the primary recruiter on during his time at Penn State. It's about as loaded as it gets, specifically in the DMV. And we talk about that area a lot on the recruiting trail, putting out a lot of good line of scrimmage players to the collegiate ranks. Tyler Bowen's one of those coaches that can come into the DMV and really start not only the DMV, but really start getting the recruiting back to where it belongs with Ohio State on the offensive line. And I think that was the primary goal for Ryan Day throughout this hiring process. And it's hard to say he did not achieve that with a hire like Tyler Bowen. Now, you talk about the player developer, the football coach of Tyler Bowen. Look, the thing that I always look for when I'm evaluating, hey, how good of a football coach are you? What head coaches are hiring you? And the one that jumps out is Urban Meyer, hired him at Jacksonville. I promise you, Ryan Day reached out to Urban Meyer and said, hey, when we're going through this process in terms of trying to find our next offensive line coach, Urban Meyer, guy that's been in the game for a really long time, obviously done it at a high level. You got any names that would make sense, that would be good hires for this offensive line coach opening? I promise you, this name probably came from Urban Meyer. James Franklin hired him twice at Penn State. Say what you want about James Franklin as a big game college football coach. He's running a really good program at Penn State, specifically along the lines of scrimmage. I think this is one that kind of checks those two boxes that you're looking for, right? Can you develop players and can you get it done on the recruiting trail? I think Tyler Bowen probably checks both of those boxes. And at the end of the day, you just nipped a sitting Power Four offensive coordinator who was calling the plays at Virginia Tech and bringing him in to coach the offensive line. It's not the flashiest hire that you're going to see. And I'm not going to get up here and say dynamite home run hire, but I think this offensive line coach hire kind of achieves a lot of the goals that Ryan Day wanted to achieve with this offensive line coach hire and Tyler Bowen. We want to get a little bit more into what Coach Bowen brings to Ohio State. Take a look at what he did on the recruiting trail during his time at Penn State before we get into it. As always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Ohio State fans. It's been a really busy last couple of days and weeks, right? A lot of coaching hot boards that we've had the conversation with. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. And again, I look at the football coach Tyler Bowen and say it's hard to knock what he's done. He's kind of worked his way up the college football landscape, has been hired by a lot of really good head football coaches who know how to evaluate coaches. I think the best asset he brings is what he brings on the recruiting trail. And you look at his time at Penn State, it's not only bringing in blue chip talent, it's what he did from an evaluation phase as well. Because you start scrolling down the list. I mean, you look at a guy like Theo Johnson, NFL tight end, Rasheed Walker, NFL draft pick at the offensive tackle spot. You start scrolling down the list, a lot of NFL dudes, and I mean, even a guy like Olu Fashanu, who is not necessarily the most touted coming out of high school. This matters on the offensive line. Can you evaluate these high school prospects at a high level and say, hey, Olu Fashanu, maybe not necessarily the highest ranked tackle coming out of high school. Can I see the potential that this kid has? He clearly had a lot of it. Was a first round NFL draft pick. You continue to scroll down. How about a guy like Tyler Warren? Primary recruiter for Tyler Warren coming out of Virginia, that DMV area. Tyler Warren was a high school quarterback coming out of high school. You talk about seeing the potential in high school prospects, which is largely just as important as, bringing in quote unquote blue chip guys. Hey, are you hitting on your evaluations out of the high school ranks? Yeah, Tyler Bowen brings both. He seems to evaluate talent out of the high school ranks at a really high level, and at the same time brings in a lot of blue chip, high caliber guys as well. This to me is very clear what Ryan Day's objective was with this hire, and you start looking at what Tyler Bowen can do in this 2026 class. I mean, I'd immediately start looking at a guy like Emmanuel Hachano in the 2026 class, one of the more impressive offensive tackle prospects I've seen in a little bit out of the high school ranks from the state of Maryland. We know Tyler Bowen has some real roots recruiting that area. Does this give you a chance to land a guy like Emmanuel Hachano? That's kind of what I'm looking at with this hire. Now, where does Ohio State go from here at the offensive coordinator spot? I know Brian Hartline's the very popular name. I trust Ryan Day to get in a really good offensive coordinator, kind of the pick of his litter. And if he thinks that Brian Hartline, a guy that has worked under him for a very long time, is ready to take over that job, you kind of support that decision. That, to me, this hire, I guess it's a long way of saying that could they have gone out and landed a bigger name as an offensive line coach? Yeah, probably. I think a lot of Ohio State fans who probably researched 20 to 50 offensive line candidates over the last week probably didn't have Tyler Bowen on the list. There were other flashier, maybe bigger names. I think this clearly showed what Ryan Day wanted to do with the offensive line coach job, and that is, hey, we got to get a guy that can bring in the talent. And I think a guy like Tyler Bowen can. We will pause it on that. Would love to hear the reaction from the Ohio State fans. Appreciate you guys. One other thing I'll add is you got some Virginia Tech fans saying, well, good riddance. We didn't like him as an OC. Well, guess what? He's not coming in as an offensive coordinator. He's not going to be calling the plays. It's a completely different job. Like, you get some guys who are really good position coaches, not so great at the offensive coordinator spot. He's not coming in to be the offensive coordinator. And so I don't think the Virginia Tech opinion on Tyler Bowen really matters here. You're getting a guy that can get it going on the recruiting trail. I think that was objective number one. We'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.